Good morning, and thank you for joining today's panel discussion, Achieving Nationwide Energy Efficiency. I am Vincent Barnes, Senior Vice President of Policy and Research with the Alliance to Save Energy, and I have the privilege of serving as our moderator for today's panel. We have with us today Holmes Hummel, Founder and Executive Director of Clean Energy Works. Clean Energy Works is a nonprofit energy solutions organization providing technical assistance and advisory services to nonprofit organizations, utility companies, transit agencies, community groups, regulators, and others, with the purpose of increasing inclusive investment in the clean energy economy, including through the utilization of energy efficiency. Holmes is a board member of Cornerstone Capital and also a board member of Clean Tech Open. As many of you may know, Holmes also served as U.S. Department of Energy Senior Policy Advisor for Policy and International Affairs in the Obama administration, where her portfolio contained a number of responsibilities, including trade policy, environmental regulation, grid reliability, and engagement with state and local energy policies. Dr. Holmes Hummel has a PhD in the Interdisciplinary Program on Environment and Resources from Stanford University. Brian Prusnek is Director of Customer Programs and Assistance for Southern California Gas, also known as SoCalGas. Prior to his current tenure as Director of Customer Programs, Brian was Director of Regulatory Affairs for SoCalGas. Brian also served as Deputy Cabinet Secretary in the administration of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and before his appointment served as Chief of Staff and Energy Advisor for the California Public Utilities Commission. Brian has his MS in Economics from Illinois State University. Mark Turner is Vice President of Business Development, Ameresco. Ameresco is an independent, integrated, comprehensive energy efficiency and renewable energy company, working with both public and private sectors in the US and the UK. In short, Ameresco is an energy solutions company at large scale, providing energy audits and deep retrofits, applying innovative, advanced technology solutions, and connecting projects to payment streams that allow client customers the ability to implement needed building and system upgrades to achieve energy savings and carbon emissions reductions. Mark has worked in the energy solutions sector for several years, including with ABM Industries and Johnson Controls. Mark has a master's in business economics from Southern Connecticut State University. Holmes, Brian, Mark, welcome to the panel. Let's begin, if we can, with a brief opening comment from each of you before we delve into our discussion. And Holmes, we'll start with you, followed by Brian, and then Mark.
First of all, thank you so much for the introduction and the warm welcome to the EE Global virtual event. I want to say it takes a tremendous amount of effort and courage to convene under these circumstances, and it's always an honor to be tagged in by the Alliance to Save Energy. I'm grateful to be invited in some ways as a callback. 2 years ago, I joined the EE Global panel on a similar topic related to equity, and it's been exciting to see what's happened in the 2 years since then. In short, what we have been able to validate is that in the United States, the scale of capital commitments to energy efficiency has got to exceed the total known capacity for political spending or political capital for public spending that we can imagine. And that's been validated by the level of ambition that we're seeing now from the Biden administration during the negotiations of the infrastructure and jobs package, which is historic in its scale, in its commitment to energy efficiency investments, and its acknowledgement that those are the labor-intensive places where we can get the fastest job growth in this part of our economy. And also, it is at least an order of magnitude too small to reach the level of ambition that's already been promised to the world by the president's own representatives in the international climate negotiations context. In other words, in order to electrify everything while we green the grid, we also need to upgrade everyone. And to string those three mantras together, I want to point out that the role of energy efficiency makes everything cheaper. In other words, if we actually stop wasting money on wasted energy, we have more resources to put into the improvements of the quality of the building shell and the building stock where people live, work, and play. The challenge that we've had up until now is that the financing mechanisms that are effective in overcoming the first cost barrier of all of our energy efficiency projects that have a similar kind of profile of upfront cost capital requirements and low operating costs over time, have systematically disqualified or discouraged a majority of the households and small businesses in the United States, and frankly, not unique to the United States, around the world. Also, in the past 2 years, we've seen the Department of Energy's Clean Energy for Low-Income Accelerators issue an issue brief on the concept of site-specific investment with site-specific cost recovery under the terms of a utility tariff that can be expansively inclusive. And it wasn't an original idea, one that had been tested first in Kansas, then Kentucky, then North Carolina, Arkansas, New Hampshire, new cases coming forward in Minnesota, Virginia, and a huge rate case in California. These are signs that more pragmatic leaders on both sides of the aisle are finding that there isn't a path to a 100% clean energy future with only half the people, and that we have to find financing mechanisms that can clear that upfront cost barrier on terms that are acceptable to everyone from all backgrounds in any income, credit score, or renter status. At Clean Energy Works, we specialize in working with utilities and community engagement teams that are working together to solve those problems in each jurisdiction. And what I'm pleased to be able to report to the EE Global participants today is that the data coming in from the field continues to show great promise and signs of confidence. In short, the utilities that have completed more than 5,000 transactions in more than a dozen utility service areas in 6 states over 10 years, topping $40 or $50 million now, have reported cost recovery rates above 99.9%, which is showing a higher cost recovery rate than their mainline business of selling electricity. Put in other words, their energy efficiency portfolios are less risky than their mainline business. And they're producing positive value streams for all of their shareholders, not just the participating customers. I'll pause there because I hope it's provocative enough to stir the conversation with my colleagues that are a part of this panel, but it shows why our enthusiasm for the EE Global audience is to take these types of bulletins from the field into new places where the good news can find new uptake.
Wonderful. Thank you, Holmes. Brian?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Brian Prusnek. I'm the Director of Customer Programs and Assistance at Southern California Gas. For those who don't know, Southern California Gas is a natural gas distribution company serving the southern half of California. We have about just under 6 million accounts of customers, and we are the largest natural gas distribution company in the country, but also as it relates to my organization, we run the largest energy efficiency program for a natural gas utility in the country, and also the largest low-income assistance programs, both EE and bill assistance for a natural gas utility in the country. I'm really excited to talk about achieving nationwide access and energy efficiency because that's something we strongly value here at SoCalGas. It's something we've made great strides to make sure all of our eligible customers who can receive assistance, who can take on energy efficiency, are doing so. And I look forward to sharing some of our lessons learned and what we do as an organization. At SoCalGas, about a third of our customers are eligible for low-income assistance programs. That's currently the eligibility requirement there is about 200% of the federal poverty line. So having about a third of our customers, that is a significant block of our customers. And again, that's customer accounts. We serve about 21 million customers, so that number is significantly larger, around the 7 to 8 million customers range. And so we've had, as I said, a lot of experience and a lot of success in making sure that we're providing access to all these programs to our customers, and happy and looking forward to sharing the lessons learned today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Mark?
Again, good morning. Thank you. This is Mark Turner for Ameresco. I'm the Vice President here for Business Development. I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to share just a couple slides here if that's possible. So largely, we've been involved with several different opportunities for creative funding and financing. Tell me if you can see this. Okay, so we'll get into largely, Ameresco's been around for obviously for about 20 years. We have a tremendous amount of clientele from both public and private sector. And on top of that, we've gone through several different iterations of clients that we cover. You can see on the screen here, from airports to state, local government, public housing, and commercial industrial. But the three models I really want to show here is largely on public sector financing, private partnerships, and we use the solar as an example, and then an alternative financing model called energy as a service.
Mark, this is Vincent. If I can interrupt you for just 1 second, I believe we've lost your screen in terms of the PowerPoint presentation. We see
Okay.
not your presentation.
Oh, you don't see it anymore. Okay.
And it appears as if we have just lost Mark. We'll give him a couple of seconds to get back in. But let's do this. Why don't we just go ahead and delve back in, and then we will get back to Mark, certainly when he returns. Look, I kind of want to start this off really kind of framing the issue, if you will. So we're exploring the issue of energy efficiency, universal access, which is really about the ability for all consumers to access energy efficiency solutions, including optimized energy efficiency that is often dependent on advanced connectivity, right, and communication technologies. So really, as a threshold, and to kind of get us started in today's discussion, I want to frame the issue a bit. What are your thoughts on, I think, did we just get Mark back? I believe.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm having a little bit of issues with the camera. So let me continue on, and if the camera breaks up, I apologize.
No worries, no worries.
Okay. So largely, we were talking about some of the moments that were available for funding, and I'll dig into some of those. So to kick off the discussion, I will briefly highlight three topics addressing funding: public-private partnerships and alternative financing. The first topic is traditional funding through the public sector, and this includes grants, rebates. The example here, we'll talk about the COVID funding allocated to the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 levels. These funds are distributed utilizing a Title I formula for each K-12 school, weighted more to high-need districts. Additionally, funding is made available to public and private high-end clients. There are set-asides for minority-serving institutions. And then lastly, there are funds that go direct to the governors for their discretion. So with that, there are also public-private partnerships. In a model that I was trying to explain before is through a solar model, we're able to do a large solar array, a solar farm, include that into the community as well, so that every solar offset also goes to the regional customers and possibly housing authorities as well. So a couple different avenues for that. On a third example, we have energy as a service model, and that's largely a what I would call an off-balance sheet, off-credit finance model for large C&I customers. But a model that we would talk about is there's a housing authority and also a military structure that Ameresco has been part of. And in that model, largely Ameresco becomes the developer. Third-party commercial entity is part of the development of the program with Ameresco. And instead of taking out a traditional loan, like a tax-exempt municipal lease, or also a bond, Ameresco becomes the third-party finance model. And all that becomes off credit because it's no longer a traditional finance. It's energy as a service, which is similar to a service-based model. And because it's a service-based model, largely you're not buying equipment at this point. You're now buying an output. So you're buying heating, cooling, lighting. It's a very unique structure. And in the military housing complex example that we have, each resident now benefits from that commercial entity, and the benefit that they have is the output from a 5, 10, or 20-year program. So those are three different types of models. And what I would say on each one of these models also, there's energy savings So these energy savings are being used along with the federal funding, along with alternate financing, energy as a service model, and in many cases, like we said earlier, public-private partnerships. It's a real interesting model, a way for residents and local communities to get involved, as long as there's a third party, a large industrial, a large commercial, a large municipality that's engaged in that with a company like Ameresco. So again, not direct to consumer, not direct to residential clients, but through these types of models, Ameresco can be able to provide output that goes through a process where it's public-private. So with that, I just wanted to give you some examples of things that we're talking about that affect some of the community. And again, earlier on, the federal funding, we broke up a little bit at the beginning. All that goes towards Title I, low-income schools. So there's available to hit those lower markets where maybe funding's not available. Maybe the investments can't be made. Oftentimes, we'll find some of the schools, they'll try to keep up with some of the suburban schools. And because of the federal funding through the COVID-19 dollars that were available, that money is set aside to try to make those improvements. And it could be around energy efficiency, HVAC, all those kinds of measures that normally would not be able to do. So with that, again, apologize for the tech, a little slow internet connection here, but those are the three models that I would suggest.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And certainly no apologies necessary. So curious enough, your timing getting back onto the screen was right on cue. We were literally just beginning to frame the issue, and so as a threshold, as we get started, that's really what I think we would like to do. So let's start this way. So, what are your thoughts on whether equitable energy efficiency access is an issue of such substantive importance that federal, state, and local policies, in addition to private industry, if you will, should seek to identify solutions to meet the identified need, right?
Right.
That's the issue.
Right.
In short, do we have a problem with equity and energy efficiency access? And if so, what is it?
So I think the most obvious one right now is solar. Solar is a great opportunity to bring renewable technology to our customer base. Largely, that's been in mostly C&I commercial space. We're seeing it in schools, K-12, and higher education. You will see some residential customers try to get solar, but it's cost prohibitive. If you're a small residential customer, you don't have the opportunity to maybe get some of the rebates, some of the federal programs that have dollars available. So that's why I mentioned the public-private partnership, where if a community decides to go and overbuild a solar array or a solar farm, then that direct additional solar power can go down to the residential customers, a housing authority, lower income, maybe some folks that can't afford that. So that's one example. Obviously, there's other things on the energy efficiency side, like HVAC. What we're seeing now is a lot of the utilities are providing rebates, but there always could be more funding, more available for the residential side.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And a bit of housekeeping for everyone. If we're not speaking, if everyone could please put their mics on mute. That kind of holds back on some of the feedback that we appear to be getting. Holmes, to you and Brian, do we have a problem with equity and energy efficiency? And let's look at the consumer side at this particular time. Is there an issue with energy efficiency access? And again, if so, what is it? Brian, let's start with you.
All right. Happy to take on that question, Vincent. I think we have to ask ourselves what the target audience is, and are we properly serving that target audience? In the state of California, the eligibility for our no-cost energy efficiency programs and our bill assistance programs, which is a 20% discount on customers' bills, the eligibility is 200% of the federal poverty line. For a point of reference for the audience, if you are, and this includes all sources of income and its gross household income. If you're a household of 1 to 2, that's $34,480. If you're a household of 4, that's $52,400. I think we have to ask ourselves if 200% is the right number. There's legislation in California looking to move that to 250%. Different cities, different states are going to be different, depending on the cost of living and minimum wage and things like that. In Southern California, 200% probably is a little low. And so if we're thinking about achieving access, or nationwide access, I think we have to ask ourselves, is that the right, what's the right target audience? And then we start working back from there. As I talked about in the introduction, we serve about 5.5 million customers. A third of those are eligible for low income programs, but we treat about 100,000-ish homes a year. And so it becomes then, once we've got the eligibility figured out, do we have the capacity? And capacity is one thing, but really, and I'm looking forward to talking about this more, this is a hard to reach sector. And so we continue to come up with new ideas, and I want to share something a little bit later, and new ways to go after this customer segment. It's very hard to reach. There's a lot of distrust in a lot of the communities with companies coming into your homes. This is a very personal type of activity, going into someone's home and upgrading their appliances, working on their homes. Letting people into your homes is challenging and for a lot of customers. And so we just have to ask ourselves, one, do we have the right target audience? And then two, do we have the right programs that are really trying to achieve those before we start kind of coming up with new programs?
Okay, excellent. Holmes?
Well, Vincent, you've asked a provocation, like, do we have an equity problem? And it draws a smile because we're here. This is the group of people at EE Global that know this problem is actually escalating to the level of the President of the United States at this moment. And the base of support that's required to advance clean energy policies of every type is torn at the tension point around the stereotypes that bear the grain of truth that clean energy appliances and upgrades are only afforded by Tesla driving, Energy Star owning, green building, condo rent dwelling residents in their 20s. Or 30s. This is not a picture of everyone. And it's certainly not a picture of a country that can move forward together. What we also know is that for some extremely surprising places, like the states I mentioned earlier, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, EE Global doesn't often find that the leaders of our field in inclusion for energy efficiency would hail from states with those names. We more often hear names like Massachusetts or Hawaii or New York or Vermont or California. But none of those states that I just named, save Hawaii, which in 2006 to 2009 had a smash hit success with a pilot program for utility site-specific investment and cost recovery using solar hot water heating equipment, have gained the kind of experience that those Midwestern and Southern states are reporting. The reason why I emphasize that is that we have to actually expand our aperture and where we think new ideas can come from in order to assure nationwide access. I completely want to associate myself with Brian's remarks about the challenges of reaching underserved market segments. They're not just underserved, they're completely disinvested as a matter of national, state, and local policy for generations. And also, what's encouraging is that in the states that I just named, the utilities with experience offering tariff terms for site-specific investment and cost recovery are actually showing that every place that they make an offer, a majority of the customers accept it. Whereas 9 times out of 10, if you offer them an on-bill loan product, it's a no. So for financing at all income levels, those that qualify and those that don't, the ones that don't want to prove that they're impoverished and the ones that can't prove that they have an American Express card, every customer that's eligible for these programs, a majority of customers that receive the offer accept it. And in some of the more recent programs that have been started with best practice and protocols that are relatively new in the field, that number is above 80% in all 3 states where the utility data is being reported. 80% opt in on an open offer to capitalize all cost-effective energy efficiency upgrades at a site, regardless of who you are or where you came from, is an explosive idea for a body politic that requires expansive inclusion in order to move forward without the vulnerability of disinformation campaigns that can drive wedges so deep that we won't recover.
No, Holmes, thank you for sharing that. And we're going to get a little deeper into that in a minute. I have another question. You can kind of start with the response here. So as we begin to look at, I guess before we begin to look at possible solutions, how are the issues of equity and access different when we're viewing urban communities versus rural communities versus low-income communities? Not all rural communities are low-income communities, but there are issues of access in terms of equity in rural communities. Not all urban communities are low-income communities, but there are still some issues of access, both with low-income and non-low-income. So could you speak some to what some of the differences or what some of the different equity issues might be within those three populations?
I'll field that briefly because it's an area we've worked a lot. And then, of course, I want to hear more from Brian myself. You see, 90% of the persistent poverty counties in the United States are served by rural utilities. And that is a stunning statistic. We cannot turn our gaze away from a landscape that Brian described is hard to serve in Southern California. Well, think about the Deep South and the layers of difficulty, social and cultural barriers that make it difficult for utilities that have been led for generations by people who've actively participated in disinvestment to somehow turn around and have a different tune. I want you to know that the rural electric cooperatives have actually led the field in the area of inclusive financing offers using tariffed terms for site-specific investment cost recovery. The data that I've described to you today is actually sourced from electric cooperatives in many of the states that I named. So on the one hand, the people who are closest to the problem are also, on the other hand, closest to a working solution that is still gaining more visibility and voice in a national conversation about adoption in urban areas where investor-owned utilities have always dominated.
Okay, thanks. Brian, you want to add anything to that?
I do want to add something to this, Vincent, and we're going to try the technology front. Susanna, I'm sharing my screen now, so if you wouldn't mind queuing this up. It's like flickering. Is that flickering for you, Vincent, and others?
Yeah, you're having the same issues I was having.
Okay, there we go.
You have stability.
I had to hit it with my hand and it stopped, you know. So Vincent, I didn't set you up for this one. So this is fantastic that you asked this question. This is how we're starting to look at our customers. What this map is showing you is this is SoCalGas's service territory broken down by zip code. In each zip code that we have in our service territory, we have an estimate for the eligible amount of customers. So if there's 100 customers, we know based upon census and survey data, 80 of those customers are eligible for our CARE program or our ESA program. These are our low-income assistance and retrofit programs. This is how we're beginning to look at our customers. And so you talked about, you know, whether they live in urban or suburban areas, et cetera. We have to start looking at our entire service territory and really beginning to drill down to the zip code and to the neighborhoods to figure out where are these customers and how do we reach those customers. On this heat map, what you'll see is the darker areas have low penetration. So that's where we have high eligibility but low penetration in these areas. And we see a lot of them are in the Central Valley. A lot of them are in Southern California and the Inland Empire. You know, so we have to begin to ask ourselves, how do we reach these customers? It is working through a huge network of community-based organizations, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, churches, local Salvation Armies, Goodwill stores that we have to work with to get the word out about these programs. These are, again, remember, these are no cost energy efficiency retrofit programs. So if we're not serving all of our customers with no cost programs, something that doesn't charge them a dime, we have a problem. And so we have to look at this and look at different ways in which we're able to do this. And so with this heat map, I can sit there and say, all right, let me look at Los Angeles County and see what I see. I can drill down specifically into Los Angeles County by the zip code, look at my penetration, and these numbers over here on the quick facts are going to tell me specifically within Los Angeles County, there's 2.7 million customers, about 894,000 care customers. Here's my average penetration, here's my average eligibility, and here's an annual bill savings that I'm seeing in Los Angeles County for these types of customers. And I can go into each of these and begin to look at, all right, in this zip code, I've got total customers of around 19,000, 12,000 are care customers, but I'm only at 50% eligibility. So I've got a lot more work to do in that county. And so I start better understanding, where are my CBOs in that zip code? Where are my faith-based organizations? How can I target media in there? So we've gotten to the point with our outreach, we can target zip code levels. And so we need to be doing that for these types of programs. Because I'm trying to challenge conventional thinking that maybe we need more programs, maybe we need more financing. And I'm saying maybe we need to think about different ways in how we reach these customers and how we identify where these customers are. Because we can throw a lot of money at the situation, but until you really start working individually with these customers and thinking about how you're able to achieve success within this customer segment, the money's not going to be helpful at some point. So that's kind of what I wanted to share to answer that question, Vincent.
Well, I appreciate that. That's excellent data. So Mark, from your background, this is a business development problem, right? We've got a product that we're trying to sell, right? We've got a product, but like an Ameresco product, if you will.
Sure.
But we don't. But we can't get it to the customer.
Right.
What are your thoughts there, based on what Brian just shared with us?
Honestly, Holmes and Brian had a great job responding to some of the issues, and I think there's multiple issues here. One is on the urban areas, we are heavily involved in housing authorities. So Ameresco is one of the largest energy service companies that works directly with the housing authorities. And in that case, although it's like a C&I, large commercial industrial, the energy efficiency drills down to the individual tenants. So these are people that are paying rent, and the outcome they're getting is low flow toilets, heating, air conditioning, better lighting, those kinds of things. And oftentimes that is funded through federal subsidy. So again, it's a federal program. It's a large C&I kind of building, but the benefit is going to the residents in that community. Now, if you go look at the rural areas, I think Holmes hit this as well. The rural area is a little bit tougher. Things are spread out a little further. You got a cooperative electric companies that you're working with. And I think some of the things that we're doing at Ameresco is trying to aggregate counties, towns, pulling them together. I used the example before, the solar array, the solar farm. That's just one example. But there might be opportunities where we'll have to pull them in together, get a little bit of scale, and try to offer some kind of programs where they share in more of a public-private partnership. That's one area. And then another, and you probably have all heard of it, is PACE financing. It's property assessed clean energy. And that goes right to the homeowner. Largely, if you own a home, you can make energy efficiency improvements in your own house, and you can finance that through your property tax bill. And what's unique about that is that helps folks that don't normally have the opportunity to go out and get financing on their own, or don't have the opportunity to go and make a large investment in a new boiler, heater, heating system. And now they can do that. And then that costing gets spread out over, it could be 5, 10, 15 years. And the unique thing about that's now a capital improvement. So now you're improving the house if you own it. If you're a landlord, again, you can still take advantage of that. It makes sense. You have your traditional write-offs, but now you're improving the value of your homes. So there's just so many ways to attack that, Vince.
No, so Mark, I greatly appreciate what you just shared. It sounds to me that you and Ameresco have been extremely successful at identifying where to go get the customer, how to get the customer to participate with you. What I'm hearing Brian say is we've got a great product, like Ameresco would likely say we have a great product. You've got a system by which to capture the audience. And I hear Brian saying we've got a great product, no cost, but we haven't quite figured out how to either capture the audience, or we're putting the dollars in the wrong place. We're not putting the dollars in a place where we need more capital to actually capture that audience to get them to the product that we're actually not trying to sell, but actually trying to provide.
Sure.
That's an accurate way. So Holmes, you've actually staked a flag on these issues, right? To some degree, through your work as founder and executive director of Clean Energy Works, and really have you really kind of led with the program known as Pay As You Save, or PAYS. You've described somewhat what, without saying it, calling it PAYS, but give us a bit more background in regards to how it works, and express your thoughts on why there is not wider adoption.
Well, a couple of quick things. The leaders in the field on Pay As You Save are the utilities that have experience using it. And the Department of Energy only detected their existence after we commissioned from the national labs an assignment to literally search the nation for solutions that would be inclusive and responsive to this panel at EE Global. In fact, it was a great concern to the Secretary's office that the Recovery Act spending was starting to recede, and there wasn't an adequate answer to how to sustain and even scale the historic level of investment that we had seen fomented by that stimulus. Well, here we are 10 years later after a second national catastrophe facing the same question. If we flood our markets with federal spending and an infrastructure package that wants to prioritize clean energy upgrades for all, what happens when that spending recedes to the jobs that we've created in communities that will still remain unserved, because we know the need is 10 times higher at least than what could be accommodated by the spending that's the maximum level of appetite expressed at those political levels. So what you have seen from Clean Energy Works is attention to the unfinished business of taking a model that was already showing promise in the field and replicating it in enough additional markets that more people gain confidence. Now, the existence of Pay As You Save as a trademark is one that has also made it easier to communicate about the concept, because it only references the minimum requirements and essential elements of a system that a utility can use reliably to deploy capital at a site and recover it on inclusive terms. But any program operator can develop a system that will allow their client utilities to achieve those types of objectives by meeting those minimum requirements and essential elements. And Clean Energy Works is a part of an ecosystem of NGOs that is accelerating the spread of that know-how. We have actually staked our claim in this way, Vincent. You can't get to 100% of anything with only half the people. And the financial services sector has already shown us that there are limits to the amount of funding available, and there are limits to the amount of financing that's applicable. And if you accept those two things as fact, that the funding is not infinite and the financing is not actually inclusively accessible, then there has to be another answer. And moving the conversation out of the financial services sector and into the economic regulatory regime of utilities that have always been able to serve customers regardless of their documentation, where they come from or where they're going to, is an important precedent for expansive levels of capital deployment. What's new is taking it from a genre where we deploy capital and then peanut butter smear the costs across everybody and then go to the economic regulators to duke it out about what's fair about that, to using the IT equipment and the software technologies available today to make the most important and cost-effective upgrades at every site on terms that are site-specific in ways that it's still accessible and fair. We are actually hoping to see that this administration will help the utilities grab hold of that experience and get their first chance to try it in the markets that, as Brian has pointed out, can be difficult to reach, but in the places where it's available, it's not proved difficult at all. The majority of the customers with access to an offer are accepting it, and they're getting maximum benefit as a result.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. So Mark, I'm gonna use this next question as a bit of a segue into a discussion about the private sector. So a substantive value of the work of Ameresco is that in addition to the audit, the deep retrofits, and other services provided, Ameresco does a real good job to help the client customer identify applicable capital solutions to meet the project costs, right? It's not just identifying what the issue is, but this is how we're going to help you pay for it. If you can, what are some of these approaches? And are there solutions being applied in the private sector as it relates to critical building infrastructure that we should consider as we think about viable solutions to achieve universal access for consumers?
So sure. So largely our conversation has been around residential and smaller users. Obviously, Ameresco spends most of our time on larger commercial and industrial. So I'm probably the square peg in a round hole here. But some of that does come down to the local residential level. And I think, the creative financing piece has got to be the most important part. There's a lot of commercial investors that want to buy into apartment buildings, real estate. And I think the barriers they have is access to funding, right? You find that oftentimes the interest rates are very high. And I went back to the comment before about energy as a service. That's where Ameresco is putting up our dollars in that case. And we're financing a model. And in that model, it's going to have guaranteed energy savings that offset some of the cost. So there's a couple of methods of getting this done, right? You have the financing. You can go out to a bank, third party, get your own. If you're having troubles in that market, we will backstop many of these deals through energy as a service. And again, I said that earlier, it's really treated differently than traditional debt. So if you're up against your debt limit, we will treat it as a ongoing service, and you're literally buying an output instead of a piece of equipment. So all those creative avenues allows more funding into what I would call the private sector. You got C&I, commercial, industrial, and then eventually that does kind of come down to the residential level. So I think just the opportunity to be able to create the funding, has some creative financing that has some tax benefits. We'll talk a little bit about that probably later. But a lot of this comes down to the tax benefit as well. So now some of that money can be offset, be reused to invest in other areas.
So Mark, I'm gonna, as we talked about in our session earlier, I'm gonna push back a little bit.
Okay.
I think you're actually the round peg in the round hole. The reason why I think your participation in this particular discussion is so important is because this can't just be about a public funding solution, right?
Sure.
We also have to kind of look to see what the private sector might be doing. And that goes a lot to some of what Holmes was talking about as well. So let me put this forward. So one solution is similar to PAYS, wherein utilities actually take the lead in making capital investments to support universal access objectives. Utilities in turn are allowed to amortize those investments and then receive a return on equity with capital costs spread across the utility rate system. Curiously enough, this scenario actually provides an incentive for utilities with the ability to amortize the investments, similar to capital investments in other infrastructure.
Sure.
That said, not all regulatory authorities favor this approach. Brian, as a former regulator, and certainly someone very close to regulators in the past and still close to regulators, you certainly have experience on the regulatory front. So what do you believe the pushback is from the regulatory community here, and is it resolvable?
Yeah, I can't get away from the regulators. It's a challenging question because when I was in the regulatory agency, we thought about this, right? Let's levelize the field. Let's make capital investments everything, right? If it's steel or if it's energy efficiency, let's make that the same. I hate to say it, there's a lot of stakeholders who don't think utilities should be earning anything. And so that is a huge hurdle to get over, because there's a large view amongst a lot of stakeholders who participate in regulatory bodies that the utilities shouldn't be getting anything. They should be mandated to do these programs. They should be mandated to make investments, and they shouldn't be able to get returns, or those returns should be significantly lower. So there is not unanimous consent with the regulators. There is a similar view among some in the regulatory space that, hey, why would we pay for these? Why would we pay an incentive on these programs when we can require these programs? So I think you run into a very big philosophical debate when you begin to look at that. Now, obviously, Holmes has found some jurisdictions in her examples that are being supportive of these types of models. In California, we've moved to a shareholder incentive model based upon therms saved. Now, that's just for our energy efficiency programs. That's not for our low-income energy efficiency programs. Our commission has put a hold on those and has raised the question of whether or not that needs to happen. So even when you do begin to make progress towards that goal of trying to levelize the playing field from a utility investment standpoint, you have these fits and starts. And so when you do that, remember, you're sending a message to the CFOs of companies, to the CEOs of companies that, hey, this stuff is depending on the body of the regulators, sometimes it's valued, sometimes it's not valued. So you have a really big challenge there when you're trying to work with a company who's focused on long-term stability, long-term stream of earnings, and very certain level of earnings, as Holmes talked about. The ability to achieve that rate of return is very important to utility management, and ensuring that they can meet those stability or those stable returns, because you have to look at the investors of those utilities. And so when you have this waxing and waning of just frankly interest in doing those types of things, it's a challenge. Now, this is not something we can handle on the national level, because these types of decisions are made up in state jurisdictions and even local jurisdictions, depending on the structure of the regulatory agencies. And so really, it's a tough one. My view for our low income programs is that these should be no cost, paid for by a public goods charge that's charged to everyone on their bills. Like, we shouldn't even have to worry about kind of the utility return side for the low income programs. We should have a fund of money that is going to our customers who are most in need, and helping them increase their energy efficiency and have discounts on their bills. Then we can talk about the utility incentive structure for our energy efficiency programs, which are solely focused on kilowatt hours reductions, kilowatt reductions, and therm saving reductions.
So let me ask the follow-up question then. Through a public goods charge, very similar to a universal service fee, right? Is this something that would be spread across the utility? Is it something that would be paid by the utility? This would be a cost to the utility. The utility could then recover that cost through rates. How does that work?
It is a charge on everybody's bill. It's a line item on everybody's bill. It could be based upon your meter. It could be based upon your usage. It's usually based upon your usage. And what that does is it allows you to fund these programs, have long-term stability to create the infrastructure of CBOs and nonprofits. We have a significant amount of nonprofits and CBOs who have built very large businesses to help carry out and fulfill the goals of these programs. So all customers who are on the system pay into it. It results in a much lower cost per customer to pay for these programs. And just last week, the California Public Utilities Commission just approved a 6-year program cycle for our ESA program and for our CARE program for $11 billion over the course of 6 years, funded by the public goods charge.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. We've got about 10 more minutes. I'm going to try to bring us back together on this. So, and I want to, outside of the utility space, what is the role of the private sector? Can private capital play a role here? And do we need private capital to also play a role here? When I'm talking private capital, I'm talking market structures. Can we get investors to come in, and are there funds created specifically for this purpose? And can there be tax incentives attached to those who invest in those types of funds to necessarily finance these types of programs, to ensure that when there are loans, these are low interest loans? And then after that, do you set up a special purpose vehicle in Treasury where investors can actually, where the capital actually exists, where investors or loan funds can actually go to Treasury and either sell those loans or get additional capital at low cost? That I know that's a lot, but I just kind of want your response to that. Is there a role for private capital and private investment here?
Well, Vincent, I just have to note the remarkable composition of the panel that Alliance to Save Energy is composed here, with 3 people who are testifying to the need and significance of non-consumer finance products, meaning not consumer loans. And I want to put a double underline around that. The Department of Energy in a decade has not found a shred of evidence that marketing consumer loans results in high uptake of energy efficiency upgrades. There's not a single program that shows us a penetration rate above 1% per year. At that rate, and that's the best rate, you could get, maybe half of where you need to go a century past when you need to get there. It's not okay for us to continue to entertain the idea that the national policy to arrive at a clean energy future is going to come on the backs of people who go further into debt in order to achieve the political aims of our governor, our president, and our mayors. That said, I do think that there's a role for private capital. I just want to separate the use of private capital and consumer loan products. You see, Brian Prusnek is a part of an investor-owned utility that has a tremendous role to play. And he's described capably all the different ways that it can lever a tremendous amount of capacity and infrastructure, know-how, and relationships in order to move resources to places as need. And Ameresco is the same. In fact, Mark already made in his remarks earlier how important it is to be able to meet the demands of private capitalists that are looking to deploy capital in the commercial sector, for example, even multifamily housing. In our case, at Clean Energy Works, we've never lacked for sources of capital that are willing to be at risk under the terms of a tariff that give us 99.9% cost recovery. In fact, we've been able to work with partners to fund a reserve fund to take that last 1/10 of 1%, and it's never been used. There's a big role for private capital to come in off the sidelines, but one of the challenges they face is that there are relatively limited numbers of service areas in the United States where the regulators have ever been asked and had a chance to answer, yes, in fact, we would like all cost-effective energy upgrades to be accomplished by the capitalization of a system that doesn't discriminate based on income, credit score, or renter status, documentation status, or otherwise. And I think that that's actually the exciting part of the 2020s. We're going to see a decade or 2 of experience come to bear on the new ideas for people who are trying to combine the strength and scale of private capital with what we've needed for public interest and public purpose for a long time.
Holmes, I appreciate you making that distinction. So let me ask. So, and it's a good one to be made. So if we're talking about the low income population, then loans are not a service option, is what I hear you saying.
Any income. There is no evidence that the Department of Energy has been able to find at any income level in any part of the United States that shows that consumer loan products are producing the level of market deployment that we need to meet the national targets that we have.
Is that it's an interesting statistic? Haven't seen it, but in your view, does part of that go to Brian's point earlier in regards to we've got the population, they're out there, but we're not reaching them?
Remember that Brian and I, who are excellent friends and compatriots on this topic, are not disagreeing on these points. I want to point out that California, to stay in Brian's sandbox, has a residential energy efficiency loan program. And it's run by people that we respect and admire. And after 5 full years, they turned in their results and showed that in a landscape that has 8 million customers that were eligible for the program, 1,059 families were served. That's unacceptable as a matter of public policy. The Alliance to Save Energy could not possibly accept that in the state of California, the size of the energy efficiency market was being increased or expanded with a program that was marketing consumer loan products. And even if you counted all of the other consumer loan product offerings that were available, we know that the uptake of the energy efficiency measures is too low. And that's why the California Public Utilities Commission on Labor Day of this past year wrote a sweeping order to issue a new rule called the Clean Energy Finance Rulemaking, for which the scope was just issued about 6 weeks ago. And I think it's an exciting time to be thinking about how utilities using tariff terms will be able to overcome both the market education and outreach barriers that Brian has pointed to for reaching even those who are eligible for no cost upgrades, and matching that type of know-how with reaching everyone with the good news that it could be possible for all cost-effective upgrades of every type, including building electrification and transportation electrification, which are also other forms of energy efficiency, to be able to carry us closer to our goals without putting on the backs of people who have the least interest in bearing it.
Yeah, Vincent, if I could just add really quickly, you know, it was taught to me very long ago in an old job. The hardest thing about energy efficiency is you got to convince customers to spend money to save money. That's a big challenge that we all have to face. And Holmes kind of referenced some of the loan programs that we have out there. The loan programs historically have only been focused on energy efficiency. We need to expand the host of eligible customers beyond, not just businesses, because some of the utility programs are only focused on businesses. Then you have a state program focused on residential. We need to make, the utilities working with the state agencies, all customers can be eligible for these programs, and all technologies should be eligible for these programs. I don't know why we just kind of limit it to one thing, and we've kind of, I think, done a disservice to a lot of our customers by giving them these alphabet soups of different loan programs for this, that, and the other. Well, here's the rebate for this, and here's the loan program for that, right? We need to think about this kind of to what modern businesses are doing by understanding what the customer experience is and then working back from there. That's really important to start doing, because now we have like 5 or 6 or 7 programs that a customer could use. The other thing too is that we know these appliances very well. We know that what the old appliances are, but the current structure of when it breaks, then you get the rebate for it. Then you can get a loan to replace it, right? We need to start looking at vintages and saying, kind of cash for clunkers type thing. Hey, if you've got a water heater that's 10 years old, 15 years old, that's eligible, right? We know this detail, and we've got to start thinking about this a little bit differently, because that's going to move things a little bit faster, because otherwise it's got to break. And what are you doing when something breaks? You're going out and you're finding the cheapest thing that you can get, because you need hot water, you need a warm home, or things like that. If we can do early retirement for a lot of these appliances, you're probably going to see the level of replacements increased, because consumers are able to look at their whole host of needs. I'm doing a home remodel. Okay, I'll go get financing for it. Start doing use cases rather than just say, well, here's a program we have. Why aren't consumers signing up for it? Oh, you're on mute, Vincent.
Mark, anything to add before we go?
Yeah, Brian's points are great. I worked at a utility years ago. The utilities touch almost everybody, if not everybody, in the state, county, city, town. I think making it easier access. I'm also a landlord, and I know when things break, it's so convenient and easy to go buy something off the shelf, right? Because it's an emergency. But I think his point's pretty good that we can figure out how to pay for the incremental cost and do a little bit more planning up front, at least on the appliance side. That makes sense, but I don't know how much time you have. But
we have about 45 seconds. I'm going to try to bring this to a close.
Okay.
I think you're exactly right, Brian. I think you're right as well as Mark, in terms of we've got the right people in front of us to kind of help us attack this issue, particularly as we kind of think about the current administration and also working on both sides of the aisle. I will close with this, and if each of you can kind of give us about 15 to 20 seconds in your response. What would you like to see in an infrastructure package addressing energy efficiency, universal access, and equity? In 10 seconds each.
I'm happy to go first. I would like to see the federal government match any type of energy efficiency incentives that the states give to especially small businesses, but any other customer segment they want to.
Okay. Holmes? You're on mute, Holmes. We cannot hear you. Maybe we've all been, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I thought maybe they shut us all off. Go ahead, Mark. We can't hear Holmes.
You can hear me at least?
Yes, we can.
All right. I think largely we need to focus on, in my opinion, on the residential, but also the small C&I. We didn't really talk much about them today. There's mom and pop stores that are open, that run businesses, and for them to make an investment to try to be energy efficient, it's just not going to happen. There's got to be some more opportunities for even these small single family owned businesses too, because those people, the residents, they bring that money back and they make improvements back home as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Holmes, we have about 30 seconds. Oh, we still can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful panel. You will be hearing from us soon again in the future as we at the Alliance begin to attack some of these issues as we go into 2021 and the 117th Congress. Thank you again, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.